Guys, welcome to the lab. This is your host, Jesse Grund, and I'm here to talk a little bit about stick mobility. Now, we had the founder of stick mobility, Dennis Dunphy, on the show this week. We talked a little bit about the creation of the stick, how it works, some of his favorite exercises with it. Today's episode, we're going to talk about what the difference between mobility and flexibility are, and understanding this difference may cause you to rethink how you've been addressing some of the dysfunction and maybe the symmetry issues that you have in your body. After we talk a little bit about that, I want to get into how the stick works. And then from how the stick works itself into my top 5 favorite exercises to do with the stick. So let's talk a little bit about how your body works first. So when we're considering your body, when your brain sends a signal to a space to move, it's basically sending, I won't get too sciencey here, it's sending a signal. That signal then travels down your spine and then out your peripheral nervous system to whatever joint, whatever action is supposed to move first. We tend to see that the first joint action for most movements of the upper and lower body are going to be in the hips or in the shoulders, okay? The shoulder is going to have to do something for the elbow and hand to most likely do something. The hip's going to have to do something for the knee and the ankle to do something. When that signal gets there, your brain and your body are then communicating. And then your body and that space is then communicating to the tissue. So it's saying, hey, all right, hip, I need you to locomote forward. So that means we're going to have to do certain things to get there. And then your hip's going, okay, well, I only have these movements in my hip to work with, because these are the only ones that the environment that my owner has lived in has taught him, or the only ones that he has trained. Cool, we'll make do, we'll figure it out, we just need to move. And then I start organizing movement that way, okay? That's a very important thing to consider. So signal goes from brain into the joints, and then the joints dictate how the tissue works in association with it. It's very cool to think about, though, because then I think, okay, so I want my joints to have the actions associated with those joints. If it doesn't have those actions, then what my body and my brain are going to do is just access the actions it has. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I have access to all these things. Now, what is access? Access is the tissue associated with it and the actions in the joint itself. So tissue access is flexibility. So the ability of the tissue to flex, to that elastic element of the tissue and the connective tissue into the joint to be able to lengthen and be able to contract. Mobility says that tissue, not only can I lengthen it, but I can control it when it is in the lengthened positions. So it's not quite the same thing. I need flexibility to have mobility, but I can't get mobility without being in control of whatever that segment in that tissue is. So the best analogy I give people is, if I told you to grab your ankle and lift your foot up over your head, what would you do? You grab your ankle and lift your foot up over your head, right? Now, let's say you can do that. Really cool. Now do it without using your hand. That's the difference between flexibility and mobility. You may have the tissue to be able to do it, but you don't have the control to be able to do it. My brain respects control. It doesn't just respect tissue. Otherwise, we'd have yoga instructors, all yoga instructors who are super flexy could back squat 300 pounds, okay? And that's not the case. Another good analogy I use is, imagine this empty plot of land, right? And you build all these houses on the land, but then you don't connect any of the houses to utilities or the power grid. Is that house livable? No, I need to connect it to utilities and the power grid to be able to use it. And that's the difference between flexibility and mobility. So it's important to have both in your training, but it's also important to remember that sometimes motions that feel off or dysfunctional aren't because you don't have enough access to tissue. It's because you don't have enough control of the tissue you have. This is very common. We see this in external hip rotation where people are just pigeon themselves to death. And then they're like, why does my glute still hurt? Why does it still do these things? And that's because the tissue is there, but you haven't actually trained it in external rotation. So it's really important to remember mobility and flexibility. They are not the same thing, but they do work in unison with each other. And we want to continue to expand our flexibility and then get control of it by using mobility, which has stability associated with it. Now, the stick is a great tool for that because it can help us do both. So if you notice, when we talked about it in the interview with Dennis Dunphy, if you notice, the stick is flexing. But if you notice, when I push it, it's trying to go back to where it came from. So I can use it as both leverage to get me into positions to gain more range. But then I can also use it to then strengthen that range by A, resisting the return of the stick back to its position. And then B, using the element of tension, so between my hands, to then create isometric tension in my body. That's the really cool thing about this modality and why you see it growing everywhere so much. If you checked out Netflix's Full Swing, which was following the PGA Tour, if you watched in their PGA Tour ecosystem, they had sticks in there. They were all working with them. If you go to an NBA game, right before the game starts, most places you're going to see them working with sticks prior. It's really cool because they know it has these properties. The other cool property it has, if you notice, the handle is a little wider. So now I've got to work on that grip strength. We know that grip strength is directly related to shoulder health. We know research connecting it to peripheral circulation and why that's important. If you haven't checked that research out, really easy. Google research, peripheral circulation, grip strength, okay? Or just ask an AI why grip strength is great for you and what research is out there. But this can now stimulate that, which is fantastic. So now I want to get into my top 5 favorite exercises to do with the stick. And exercise number 1, which is I think the thing that made it the most popular and the most famous, is going to be our bow and arrow. Now our bow and arrow is going to work on our lateral line of fascia. So what we're going to do is we're going to work to open up in the frontal plane, which means my hips have to stay in that plane. So if I take the label of the stick, I hold it outside my right hip, I bring my left hand thumbs down, and then I push into this bow. Now this stick is trying to flex back to where it came from. I'm resisting it and pushing my hip away, which is creating length down this side, but now also control because it's trying to come back. I can create tension through my hands here. I can play with different positions that now change the bow. It's one of my favorite exercises. It kind of opens up. If you think lateral line, we think, into IT band, into TFL, QL, into our lats, into our serratus. There's a lot of different stuff happening on that side, which most people don't address in the things that they're doing. Next is really simple, and that's just going to be our standing rotations with the stick. Now, the reason I love this is because we get this great upper body opener, but also we can add hip rotation to it. So now I might even get into my thoracic spine a little bit, which is going to be a huge benefit if I don't do anything to actually open up that spine area. Again, the stick lends itself to be able to create tension so I can learn. I like to say that tension creates retention. So the more tension I can create in the stick in different positions, the more retention I can create to my nervous system and everything associated with it, that this is a position that I want to return to. Now I can take that into what my third favorite exercise is, which is our slap shot. Now we're starting to get into the intermediate to advanced exercises here, but what we're going to do is we're going to take this nice wide stance, soft hinge. I'm going to bring the stick across my body, and then what I'm going to do is sit back and lunge. And now I'm getting spiral line stuff. I'm getting that lateral lunge. So now I'm getting external hip here, internal long adductor. I'm getting a lot of stuff all in one motion, which I can set, rep, hold. I love to use these as a superset if I'm loading just like linear squats, and then I want to go into that right afterwards. It's a whole lot of fun to be able to do. Okay. Next, especially for grip strength, is going to be our monkey hangs. Now, monkey hangs I love to do from half kneeling, so I can get this nice tight squeeze of my glute on the same side, bring the stick nice and close to me. Then I'm going to reach up as high as I can, wrap my wrist around, and I want to feel like I'm hanging. You can see there's some flexion going on in this stick. Well, now I'm working some of the mechanics that we get from dead hanging from a pull-up bar, but now I'm getting more of the arm line to go along with it. The direction of the stick can then change where my shoulder sits. So again, I can train some of the elements of that shoulder itself. And then finally, the most advanced, and if you know me and you know my business, you've actually seen this as it's my logo. It's me actually doing it, and that's the Ninja. And I love the Ninja. So it's an advancement of the slap shot. It's a nice wide stance. The stick goes inside the big toe of one side. I grab high, I lateral lunge, I reach down and scoop, and then I'm going to shift into a lunge into the other side. And then shift back. You want to talk about a bang for your buck exercise. This is mobility. The ability to get there and control it needs tissue that can lengthen, but also tissue that I have control over. So stick mobility, a great modality to be able to create more ability in the body, more flexibility so you have access to tissue, more control of that tissue. And those 5 exercises I showed you, there are so many more out there. Check them out on YouTube. I've also taught some classes on their Instagram page, and continue to tune in to the